Hello, and welcome to this bonus edition of Don't Miss This. I'm your host, Jennifer Garrity. And today we're going to explore a temporary exhibit at the Musée du Quai Branly, centered around the life of Léopold Sédar Senghor, and the impact that this man had on French and Senegalese culture, and on the African art world at large. Senghor and the Arts, Reimagining Universalism. Senghor was the first president of the Republic of Senegal from 1960 to 1980. But his story begins sooner in the 1930s, when he began publicly denouncing racism, colonialism, and segregation, wanting to, quote, bring the black peoples onto history's main stage, end quote. He was a key member of the Négritude movement, alongside people like Alioune Diop, Jane and Paulette Nardal, Alain Locke, and W.E.B. Du Bois. One of his main focuses, particularly as president, was to promote the arts of Africa and the African diaspora. Many of his policies have been debated and criticized, and this exhibit aims to put Senghor's work in historical context, without bias. In 1956, the first Congress of Black Writers and Artists was held at the Sorbonne in Paris. During a period of colonization and segregation, Diop and the Présence Africaine teams managed to gather a group of Black intellectuals, artists, and militants from different backgrounds from multiple continents. By the end, they had agreed that the, quote, flourishing of culture is conditioned by the ending of 20th century shames, colonialism, the exploitation of the disadvantaged, and racism, end quote. As a leader of the Négritude movement, Senghor created staunch cultural policies during his 20-year presidency. Over a quarter of his budget went to education, training, culture, and to supporting contemporary artistic creation. These policies were unprecedented among the recently independent African countries. In 1966, the first World Festival of Negro Arts exhibit, organized by France and UNESCO, was held in Dakar in April and at the Grand Palais in Paris in June. Around 500 pieces from nearly 200 living artists from Africa, the Caribbean, North and South America, and Europe were put on display, allowing people to view African art, not just from an ethnological perspective, but from an aesthetic and historic one as well. Senghor said that he wanted to show that African art was, quote, at the heart of the 20th century, a gushing river that never slows, an essential element of the universal civilization growing before our eyes, by us and for us, by all and for all, end quote. Senegalese artist Iba Ndiaye, whose art we're seeing here, presided over the event, saying it, quote, finally allows all African painters to come in contact with one another, to see where they diverge on the one hand and where they come together on the other, in attempting to depict the modern world, end quote. But Senghor noticed a powerful resistance in European audiences to acknowledge the creative power and beauty of African art, which really disturbed him. So, back in Senegal, Senghor created training, creative, and broadcast institutions for visual and performance arts. The House of Arts was created in Dakar in 1958 and renamed the School of Arts after the independence. Here, students could study music, dance, drama, and visual arts, which Iba Ndiaye taught. In 1964, the National Tapestry Factory was opened and headed by Papa Ibra Tall. Some Senegalese artists came to France to study tapestry manufacturing, and some French tapestry weavers went to Senegal to train students. Tapestries by Senegalese artists were used to decorate government buildings and for diplomatic gifts. This tapestry, titled The First Song, was the first woven in France by Papa Ibra Tall. In 1965, the Daniel Serrano National Theatre was inaugurated by Senghor. It managed the National Ballet Company, the National Drama Company, and the National Lyrical Ensemble, making Senegal the first African country with professional artists on its payroll. the Sorano Company became an official overseas ambassador for Senegal. In 1966, the Dynamic Museum opened in Dakar, showcasing work by Senegalese artists, prehistoric African art, pieces by foreigners with a cultural nature, and famous Western artists. Some of those foreigners include names you'll know, like Pablo Picasso, whom Senghor visited in his workshop in 1948. Picasso lent his work to a poster for the first Congress of Black Writers and Artists, and 236 pieces to the Dynamic Museum. Senghor himself was a poet, and often his published poems would be accompanied by paintings, like these by Marc Chagall. This beautiful painting was created by French painter Alfred Manessier. It's titled Homage to Martin Luther King, April 1968. King's assassination had a profound effect on Senghor, who paid his own national homage to him in Senegal. 8 years later, Senghor would publish his own poetry collection titled Elegy for Martin Luther King. In 1974, the exhibit Senegalese Art Today opened in the Grand Palais in Paris, with more than 150 pieces. This exhibit then traveled the world. Senghor spearheaded cultural diplomacy. He considered artists his ambassadors and often traded art with France, like 26 Senegalese pieces for 15 French tapestries. Each of the pieces you're seeing here was created by a Senegalese artist in one of the institutions in Dakar that Senghor opened. But not everyone agreed with Senghor and his policies. In 1974, artist Issa Samb, who had also been educated at the National Institution of Art, burned his paintings that had been selected for the Senegalese Art Today Expo in Paris. He denounced the institutionalization of art and did not want to be associated with the Négritude movement. In direct opposition, he opened the Agit Art Laboratory, rejecting the formalism of the Dakar School and advocating for breaking down barriers, collective creation, and ephemeral practices. Agit Art is still active today. In 1973, Senghor started working on a cultural complex centered around a museum that would have contained pieces from the Ifan Museum, loans from foreign museums, newly acquired pieces, and his own personal collection. When he left office in 1980, this project was abandoned. Today, there is a Museum of Black Civilizations in Dakar that carries on Senghor's legacy and Pan-African ambition, although it has no permanent collection. Senghor et les Arts, Réinventer l'Universel will be at the Musée du Quai Branly through November 19, 2023, and I would recommend a visit.